185 feet below the surface of Lake Huron, there is a ship sitting perfectly upright on the bottom. Its three masts are still standing straight up. The cabin windows are still intact. You can look through the glass and see a stool, a table, and a winding staircase. The crew's lifeboat is still resting quietly next to the hull, as if someone just parked it there. The ship sank in 1875. Nobody knows exactly how. There is no damage to the hull, no holes, no shattered timber, nothing broken at all. It just went straight down and sat on the bottom like it was placed there by a giant hand. And this is not the strangest wreck in the Great Lakes. According to estimates from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and Maritime Heritage researchers, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 ships have been lost in these 5 lakes. That is more shipwrecks per square mile than almost any body of water on the planet. And because the water at the bottom is fresh, near freezing, and almost completely devoid of oxygen, these wrecks do not rot. They do not crumble. They do not disappear. They sit there, perfectly preserved, frozen in the exact position of their final moments, some of them for over a century. The Great Lakes are the largest underwater museum on Earth, and the 5 wrecks we are about to visit are the ones that engineers, historians, and physicists still cannot fully explain. This is the Cornelia B. Windiate, a 3-masted schooner, 136 feet long, built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, in 1874. According to records from the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, the Windiate was designed to carry about 16,000 bushels of wheat. But on November the 27th, 1875, the owners loaded her with 21,000 bushels, 5,000 over capacity. This was common. According to historians, the final weeks of the Great Lakes shipping season were the most profitable and the most dangerous. Cargo prices climbed as winter approached. So did the risk. The Windiate left Milwaukee bound for Buffalo, New York, sailing into what historical weather records describe as extreme cold and high winds. And then she vanished. For over 100 years, everyone assumed the ship went down somewhere in Lake Michigan. There was no record of her passing through the Straits of Mackinac. Then, in 1986, divers found her. Not in Lake Michigan, in Lake Huron, near Alpena, Michigan. She had somehow made it through the straits and traveled farther east than anyone believed possible. And here is the part that baffles researchers. According to NOAA archaeologists who documented the wreck with drawings, measurements, photographs, and video, the hull shows no damage whatsoever. The hatches are still in place. The cargo holds are still sealed. Thousands of bushels of wheat are still packed in the hold, all the way up to the deck beams. That is almost unheard of for a sunken ship. There is no evidence the ship struck anything. No evidence of crushing from lake ice. Nothing. So how does a ship sink in a violent November storm without sustaining any structural damage at all? According to the maritime archaeologists at Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, the leading theory involves ice. Not ice in the water, ice on the ship. In late November, when temperatures plunge and waves crash over the deck, the freezing spray coats everything. The rigging, the masts, the deck, layer after layer after layer. On an already overloaded ship carrying 5,000 extra bushels of wheat, that additional ice weight would have been catastrophic. Researchers believe the ice slowly raised the center of gravity until the ship became critically unstable. And then it did something unusual. Instead of capsizing violently like most ships in a storm, the Windiate appears to have sunk straight down, slowly and evenly. So gently that the masts never broke, the cabin never collapsed, the lifeboat never drifted away. The crew of 9 never had a chance. Today, divers describe the Windiate as one of the most hauntingly preserved wrecks in the Great Lakes. A stool still sits inside the cabin. A table is still in place. The rigging still drapes down through the port and starboard deadeyes to the intact deck below. According to the National Maritime Historical Society, the Windiate is a time capsule from over 130 years ago, a ghost ship that answers almost every question except the most important one. What happened in those final minutes, now? If the Windiate is a mystery of physics, the next wreck is a mystery of engineering, the SS Cyprus. Built in Lorain, Ohio, launched on August 17, 1907. According to records, she was 420 feet long, with a steel hull rated at 15,000 tons. A marine trade publication called her one of the most seaworthy vessels ever turned out by a lake shipyard. She was brand new, state-of-the-art, and she sank on her second voyage. On October 11, 1907, the Cyprus was hauling iron ore from Superior, Wisconsin to Buffalo, New York, when a moderate gale arose off Deer Park in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. According to contemporary accounts, the storm was so mild that only smaller vessels sought shelter. The big steamers barely noticed it. But something was happening inside the Cyprus that the crew could not see. According to the sole survivor, second mate Charles G. Pitts, the ship had been pounded by northwesterly waves all afternoon. A list to port slowly developed and kept getting worse. By 7:45 that evening, the engines had stopped. The Cyprus lurched to port and capsized. 22 of the 23 crew members died. Pitts clung to a life raft for nearly 7 hours in freezing water before stumbling ashore at Deer Park. He lived until 1961 and continued working as a mariner, but he rarely spoke about what happened. For exactly 100 years, the wreck sat undiscovered. Then in August of 2007, members of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society were using side-scan sonar to search for a completely different wreck when they detected a large object on the bottom. They sent down a remotely operated vehicle expecting to find the SSDM Clemson. When the camera reached the stern, they found brass letters spelling out Cyprus, Fairport. The ship was lying on her port side in about 460 feet of water. And what researchers found raised more questions than it answered. The hull was completely intact, no cracks, no breaches. For a ship that capsized violently, the structural integrity was surprising. But there was one critical detail. According to multiple maritime sources, the Cyprus was equipped with a relatively new type of hatch cover called the Mulholland sliding hatch. These covers used a steel-on-steel seal, and according to researchers, this type of hatch was prone to allowing water past, unless special tarpaulins were fitted over them. It remains unclear whether Captain Hoyk ordered those tarpaulins deployed. Here is what researchers believe happened. As the waves rolled the Cyprus, small amounts of water seeped through the Mulholland hatches into the cargo hold. Iron ore is incredibly dense. When water mixes with it, it creates a heavy, shifting slurry. That slurry would have sloshed to one side every time the ship rolled, adding thousands of pounds of shifting weight to the list. Each roll would send more water through the hatches. Each wave would make the slurry heavier and more unstable. The crew would not have seen it happening. By the time the list became obvious, there was nothing they could do. A passing steamer reportedly observed a reddish wake trailing behind the Cyprus shortly before she went down. That red water was iron ore, being pumped or leaking out of the hull. The ship was already dying from the inside. After the Cyprus disaster, Great Lakes maritime regulations were changed to require tarpaulined hatches on Lake Superior during certain times of the year. The fix cost almost nothing. The lesson cost 22 lives. Now we go to a mystery that is still completely unsolved. The Marquette and Bessemer No. 2, a 338-foot steel train ferry that vanished on Lake Erie on December 7, 1909. According to records, she was built in Cleveland, Ohio in 1905, designed to carry up to 30 loaded railroad cars across the lake between Canute, Ohio, and Port Stanley, Ontario. A routine crossing, 5 hours. She had done it hundreds of times. On the morning of December 7th, The Marquette and Bessemer departed Cano at 10:43, carrying a full load of 30 railroad cars, mostly filled with coal, along with some steel beams and iron castings. There were approximately 36 crew members on board, plus one passenger. Albert J. Weiss, the treasurer of the Keystone Fish Company out of Erie, Pennsylvania. The ship sailed straight into a brutal winter storm. Winds reportedly reached 75 miles per hour. Temperatures dropped from 40 degrees to 10 degrees in less than 24 hours. Conflicting reports came in from both the Canadian and American sides of the lake. Some people claimed to hear the ship's distress whistle at 1 in the morning. Others said between 3 and 5. According to one account, the captain's wife in Conneaut said she heard the whistle herself. The ship was never seen again. 3 days later, a search tug discovered lifeboat number 4 about 15 miles off Erie, Pennsylvania. 9 frozen bodies were inside. None of them were dressed in warm clothes, which suggests the evacuation was rushed and desperate. And here is where the story takes a dark turn. According to reports, the body of steward George R. Smith was found carrying 2 large knives and a meat cleaver from the ship's galley. The body of Captain Robert McLeod was not found for 10 months. When it finally washed ashore on the Canadian side, some accounts describe slash wounds. These details fueled speculation for decades, but most maritime historians today believe the knives were likely used for practical purposes during the emergency, cutting ice from lifeboat lines and davits, or cutting ropes during the chaotic evacuation. What makes this wreck truly baffling is not the circumstances of the sinking. It is the fact that no one can find it. Lake Erie is the shallowest of the Great Lakes. The average depth is only about 62 feet. How do you lose a 338-foot steel ship carrying 30 loaded railroad cars in what is essentially a shallow bathtub? According to maritime researchers, several discoveries of the wreck have been announced over the years. Every single one turned out to be a different ship. It has been described as the holy grail of Lake Erie shipwrecks. Unsubstantiated rumors of its location being kept secret have circulated in the Lake Erie diving community for years. One theory, supported by at least one known precedent, is that the wreck may have sunk into the thick muck on the bottom of Lake Erie. Another theory focuses on a critical design flaw. The Marquette and Bessemer had no stern gate. The open stern was designed to allow railroad cars to roll on and off. But in a storm, it meant massive waves could flood the ship directly from behind. According to reports, Captain McLeod had complained about this vulnerability just weeks before. He had demanded that a stern gate be installed. The company promised to do it during the winter layup. The winter layup came 3 weeks too late. Some researchers believe the loaded railroad cars broke free during the storm. 30 cars, filled with coal, rolling to one side of the ship, would have shifted thousands of tons of weight instantly. The ferry would have capsized in seconds. And somewhere at the bottom of the shallowest Great Lake, a 338-foot ship with 30 railroad cars is still hiding. Now we go to the wreck that divers call the most haunting in the Great Lakes, the L.R. Doty, a wooden steamship 291 feet long, built by F. W. Wheeler and Company in West Bay City, Michigan, in 1893. According to the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association, she was built of white oak, with steel arches embedded in her hull for additional stability. On October 25, 1898, the Doty left South Chicago carrying 107,000 bushels of corn, towing a 4-masted schooner called the Olive Jeanette behind her. By 1 in the afternoon, the ships were north of Milwaukee when the winds began to freshen. By 4, the storm had become a monster. According to reports, winds reached 70 miles per hour. Waves crested at 30 feet. At 5 o'clock, the tow line between the Doty and the Olive Jeanette snapped. The crew of the Jeanette lost sight of the Doty almost immediately. The Olive Jeanette survived the storm barely. Her crew endured 3 days without sleep or food, lashed to whatever structure remained on deck after the waves tore the deck houses clean off. The Doty was never seen again. All 17 crew members and the ship's 2 cats, named Dewey and Watson, were lost. For 112 years, the wreck remained missing. Then, in 2010, a group of explorers led by marine historian Brendan Bylod and charter captain Jitka Hanakova relocated a target that a commercial fish tug had snagged back in 1991. The divers went down on a mooring line into 320 feet of pitch black, near freezing water. When they reached the bottom, they knew immediately. They sent up a red lift bag with a note attached. When it broke the surface, everyone on the boat felt their hearts sink. Red lift bags with notes usually mean someone has been hurt. But when they opened the note, it read something very different. It was the Doty, and it was intact, sitting upright on the lake bottom, settled into the clay. The cargo of corn from 1898 was still in the hold. The ship's boilers were still in place. A wheelbarrow used to move cargo was still lying on the deck, and according to Bylod, the crew's corpses are likely still intact as well, preserved by the freezing water, probably still in the boiler room, where they would have gathered as the ship went down. The most likely explanation, according to researchers, is that the rudder chain snapped while the Doty was turning around to try to help the Olive Jeanette. Without steering, the 300-foot ship was at the mercy of 30-foot waves crashing over her fragile wooden hatches. The ship was pushed backward and swallowed whole, landing on the bottom in what appears to be the exact position of its final seconds. The articles from 1898 that the crew had with them are reportedly still in the cabins of the ship, in the same condition they were left, perfectly preserved by cold, fresh water that acts like a biological pause button. Which brings us to the final wreck, and the one that might be the most incredible of all, the Gunilda. Built in 1897 by Ramage and Ferguson in Leith, Scotland, the Gunilda was a 195-foot steel-hulled luxury steam yacht. According to maritime records, she cost approximately $200,000 to build, which in today's money would be somewhere in the range of $7 million. She was equipped with a triple expansion steam engine, twin boilers, and could reach a top speed of about 14 knots. In 1903, she was purchased by oil baron William L. Harkness of Cleveland, Ohio. Harkness was a Yale graduate who had inherited a large share of Standard Oil from his father. He was a member of the New York Yacht Club, and the Gunilda became the club's flagship, the most prestigious private vessel on the water. In the summer of 1911, Harkness, his family, and friends were on an extended cruise along the north shore of Lake Superior. They planned to head into Lake Nipigon to fish for speckled trout, but to get there, they needed to navigate through a series of islands and shoals near the small town of Rossport, Ontario. When the Gunilda docked at Coldwell Harbor, Harkness asked around for a local pilot to guide them through. An experienced local man named Donald Murray offered his services for $15. Harkness said that was too much. The next day, at Jackfish Bay, another local named Harry Legault offered to pilot them to Rossport for $25, plus train fare back. According to multiple accounts, the Gunilda's captain, Alexander Corkum, and his crew thought the offer was entirely reasonable. Harkness refused again. American charts of the area did not show any shoals on their intended course, so Harkness ordered his captain to proceed at full speed without a pilot. 5 miles from Rossport, the Gunilda slammed into McGarvey Shoal, known to locals as Old Man's Hump. The impact drove 85 feet of the yacht onto the rocks, raising the bow high out of the water, while the stern dangled over 270 feet of open water. No one was injured. Harkness took a launch to Rossport, then caught a train to Port Arthur to arrange for a salvage tug. The James Whalen, reportedly the largest and strongest tug on Lake Superior, arrived the next day with a barge in tow. The captain of the Whalen assessed the situation and advised Harkness to hire a second tug and barge to stabilize the yacht during the pull. Harkness refused to pay for a second tug, so they tried with one. The Whalen pulled the Gunilda off the shoal, and the moment she slid into open water, Exactly as the tug captain had predicted, she immediately keeled over to starboard. Water poured through open portholes, doors, companionways, hatches, and skylights. Within minutes, the flagship of the New York Yacht Club was gone, 270 feet straight down. The crew of the Whalen had to cut the tow line to avoid being dragged under. Everyone on board was rescued. Lloyd's of London paid out a $100,000 insurance policy. Harkness went home and eventually bought another yacht. He died in 1919 and never spoke publicly about the Gunilda again. But the story does not end there. In 1967, a diver named Chuck Zender rediscovered the wreck, and what he found was almost impossible to believe. According to the Cousteau Society, which dived and filmed the wreck in 1980 using the research vessel Calypso and the diving saucer SP-350 Denise, the Gunilda is the best preserved, most prestigious shipwreck in the world. They called it the most beautiful shipwreck in the world. The ship is sitting perfectly upright on an even keel at 270 feet, with her deck at 242 feet. Everything that was on her when she sank in 1911 is still in place. Both masts are still standing. The compass binnacle is still mounted. The entire superstructure is intact. Inside, there is a piano still sitting in the parlor. Lanterns, furniture, windows unbroken. And according to divers who have visited the wreck, most of the paint on her hull still survives, including the gold leaf gilding on the bow, still shining after more than a century underwater. This is possible because of what scientists call the thermocline. At 270 feet in Lake Superior, the water temperature holds at a constant range near 34 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Year-round, there's almost zero light and critically low oxygen levels. According to marine biologists, this combination of extreme cold, darkness, and near anoxic conditions creates what amounts to a perfect biological pause button. The wood-boring organisms called shipworms that destroy ocean wrecks within decades simply do not exist in the cold freshwater of the Great Lakes. The aerobic bacteria that break down organic material cannot thrive without oxygen. The chemical reactions that cause rust and corrosion are dramatically slowed by the lack of salt and the near-freezing temperatures. According to Ron Bloomfield of the Michigan Underwater Preserve Council, the Great Lakes have preserved the most intact collection of wooden shipwrecks in the world. Vessels with viable wood surviving after almost 2 centuries on the bottom. The Gunilda is the crown jewel of that collection, a gilded time capsule from the height of the Gilded Age, sunk not by a storm, not by a design flaw, not by a mystery of physics, but by one man's refusal to spend $15. There are somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 shipwrecks at the bottom of the Great Lakes. Most of them will never be found. The ones we have found tell us something unsettling. These lakes do not destroy what they take. They keep it. Perfectly. The wheat is still in the hold of the Windiate. The iron ore is still scattered across the lake floor around the Cyprus. The corn is still in the cargo bay of the Doty. The piano is still in the parlor of the Gunilda. And somewhere in the shallow mud of Lake Erie, 30 railroad cars loaded with coal are still waiting to be found. The Great Lakes are not just water. They are the largest cold storage vault on the planet. And they never give anything back.